Assalamualaikum and good morning everyone, especially to our respected lecturer, Miss Again, and my fellow friends. So for today, we are from Group 6 and today we will be presenting our topic titled The Cooperative Principles and Politeness with a focus on flouting the maxims. Okay, so first let me introduce our two members. First we have A.zulaika, and second we have Nick Neslins, and third we have Nur Atika Hidayah, which is me, and lastly we have Umar.
Okay, first, what are maxims? Maxims are unspoken, basic rules that we automatically follow when we talk to each other. They guide us to communicate clearly, honestly, and appropriately. These rules are part of what we call the cooperative principle, which is the idea that people naturally try to help each other understand the message in a conversation. So, the core idea behind the cooperative principle is simple. When you speak, the listener assumes that you are trying to cooperate and be helpful. These maxims act like the terms and conditions of normal conversation. We don't sign them, but we follow them. And here is something important. If someone breaks a maxim, the listener usually assumes there is a reason behind it. Not Next, let's look at a flouting. A flout happens when someone deliberately and very obviously breaks a maxim. They may give irrelevant information, say something clearly untrue, or withhold something important. This is not an accident, it is purposeful, and the audience knows it is purposeful. Christ considered flouting as a major violation but with a communicative purpose. In implicature theory, we have two types of cases, which is first, standard implicatures from Levinson 1983. These are situations where the listener assumes the speaker is observing the maxims. And second, flouts from Christ. These are different. The speaker intentionally does not follow the maxim in order to send an indirect message. So, a flout is not a random. It is a strategy used to communicate something indirectly. Okay, now let's focus on one type, which is flouting the quantity maxim. The quantity maxim requires the speakers to give as much information as needed. Not too little, not too much. A flout happens when someone very obviously gives too little information for the situation. This makes the listener search for the hidden meaning. When the writer or speaker intentionally leaves out details, it forces the reader to think, why is this person withholding information? What are they trying to imply? For example, let's look at an example that have been written here to understand how this works. Imagine a recruiter writing a testimonial for a job applicant. Normally, a testimonial should be detailed, which is describing skills, strengths, and personalities. But in this case, the writer only writes 2 sentences. This is a very obvious breach of the quantity maxim if it is too short, too lacking in information for the context. And because the reader knows that the writer should give more details, the lack of details becomes meaningful. The hidden message or implicature is that the writer probably does not have a high opinion of the person. So here, the missing information becomes the criticism or negative message.
Okay, now I'm going to explain flouting the maxim of quality. So according to Klein 1994, this maxim tells us to do not say what you believe to be false and do not say anything without adequate evidence. But when someone flouts this maxim, they purposely say something untrue or exaggerated. The speaker is not being truthful in the literal sense, and this is obvious to the listener. And because of this, listeners infer a deeper or hidden meaning. This type of flouting often appears through irony, metaphor, mercies, or understatement, and hyperbole. So these are all ways of saying something that is not literally true, but carries an implied message. For example, let's take a look at the example. Okay, on the slide is the famous line from Princess Diana, which is, there were 3 people in this marriage. This is false because a marriage only involves 2 people. But by saying it, she implies the presence of a third person, which is Charles' lover. So she is not lying. She is deliberately using an untrue statement to reveal something truthful. And this is exactly how the maxim of quality is plotted to create a debate. Next, let's take a look at flouting the maxim of relation, which is all about relevance. So according to Klein 1994 states that speakers should be relevant, and this is to ensure the contribution to conversations are appropriate to the context. The example on the slide illustrates this. At a tea party, person A suddenly says, Mrs. A is an old bag. After a moment of silence, person B completely changed the topic and says, the weather has been quite delightful this summer. This shift is intentional because person B chose not to respond to A's rude comment. By doing so, B implicates that the statement should not be discussed. The relevant answers become a polite way of refusing to engage. So, flouting the maxim of relations happen when someone gives an unrelated response to communicate a deeper message, or usually distancing, disapproval, or discomfort.
Flouting the maxim of manner. So let's deep dive into this subtopic. The question is whether the text is clear, concise, and unambiguous, stated by Flavidio 2013. So basically, the basic of maxim of manner is about being clear, brief, and coherent, and also avoid ambiguity. So as we know, flouting the maxim of manner is breaking the rule of maxim of manner. It's flouting the maxim of manner. So here, we can see that the example is being intentional ambiguity. And that is the advertiser's trick to use the go to work on an egg. So from the sentence, it has two meanings simultaneously. So second example is let's go to that place we talked about yesterday. And this is also intentional ambiguity or intentional obscurity. In this context, it prevents a third party, which is a child, who is a child, from understanding the true message. Because we know that child always hold the true value of promises. Maxim of clarity. Klein maintains the overall maxim of clarity while adding the following submaxims stated by Flavidio 2013. So first is that we have to be as straightforward as possible. Do not make it any more difficult to understand than may be detected by questions of faith or authority. So indirectness is only possible because of politeness or respectfulness. For example, when facing with elderly or the highest authority. Second is appropriate length. Make your contribution the appropriate length required by the nature and purpose of the exchange and the discourse parameter of your culture. So this means that the message length must be judged against the specific situations or context. Crucially, the culture expectations of the conversations. In some culture, a brief answer can be rude, while in others, a long one is tedious. So the culture set the appropriate length. And lastly, culture structure. Structure your discourse according to the requirement of your culture. So for example, some culture require presenting background context or apologies before stating the main point, while others require stating the main point first before conversation.
Now, let's take a look at hedges. Hedges is a concept of which certain word or phrase are used to cover up flouting so that we cannot be accused of violating maxims. Speakers use hedges to show that they are aware of what they are saying. It acts like sort of a safe word or phrase. So with all that being said, how do hedges complement all those previous maxims? Let's dive in. First, let's look at the hedges for maxim of quantity. When we give too much or too little information, we might be accused of flouting. But if you say, for example, all I know is, before saying your points, it acts as a safe word. This phrase tells the listener that I may give too little information, but that is just as far as I know. So they can't accuse us of flouting. Second is hedges for maxim of quality. When we are uncertain about the truth, we may use hedges such as, it's probably at least 50 years old. The word probably acts as an indication that we are in fact aware that it may not be true, but we are just guessing. In other words, it acts as a safe word or hedges against the flouting of maxim of quality. Third, let's take a look at the hedges for maxim of relation. When a speaker couldn't be directly relevant, maybe there's no more relevant detail to add, for example, where you are in a discussion and all the points related to the current conversation has already been said. So you cannot add any more relevant detail. You may use hedges like on the other hand. On the other hand can be used to tell the other speakers that we are not flouting. We are just simply moving on to the next topic as there are no more things to add for the current conversation. Finally, we got the hedges for maxim of manner. This one is used when the speaker can't be fully clear or avoid being too direct. Maybe because the subject of the speech is too sensitive or explicit, and being ambiguous is the best way to go about it. However, being ambiguous may be considered as flouting the maxim of manner. So, a speaker can use hedges. For example, this is all confusing, I know. This phrase shows that the speaker is aware of what they are talking about. They are aware that the speech is a little ambiguous. But they simply choose to be ambiguous because they simply cannot be too direct with the topic of the conversation.